it was in 1950, they had actually been doing preparations for a council, and Pope Pius XII ended up just didn't go through with that. Well, he dies in 1958, and then Roncalli is elected as Pope John the 23rd. Well, a lot of people don't know this, but when he was a priest, he was actually a professor of church history. So church history was a big part of his work. And in particular, he was a priest of the Diocese of Bergamo, which is near Milan. And so he would go to the Ambrosian Library in Milan and do research there. And he came across these several volumes, something like 39 or 40 volumes of text dealing with the implementation of the Council of Trent. And he particularly was influenced by the work of St. Charles Borromeo, who had been the Archbishop of Milan, and conducted an apostolic visitation to the Diocese of Bergamo. And there were like multiple volumes detailing how he implemented Trent in the Diocese of Bergamo. Okay. And as Father Roncalli, he was really enthusiastic about that. Like, he really appreciated the pastoral renewal that took place through Trent and its implementation by St. Charles Borromeo. He actually spent decades preparing to publish these works for a wider audience, and he was training seminarians to translate from the Latin and all of these things. And I don't remember how many volumes he published out of that, but it was over several decades. The last one to be published was in 1959, the last of those volumes. And that's the same year he announced he was calling an ecumenical council. So
he shut the book.
Basically, he wanted a renewal for the church because of his appreciation for what Trent did. And so he wanted another renewal of the church. So Trent was actually a big part of his inspiration for doing that. Also, again, Vatican I was never completed. So there were a lot of things it didn't cover that it was planning to cover. And you couple that with the fact, I mean, think about 1870 to 1959 or the start of the council in 1962. A lot of stuff happened in the world. You know, you had the communist revolutions. So you had the rise of the communism in China and in Russia. You had technological advancements like we'd never seen in the history of humankind. I mean, you think about the technology from 1870 to 1962. I mean, airplanes, automobiles, even the typewriter was like fairly new during Vatican I. Like, no one had one.
Wow.
You know, telephones, television, radio.
Yeah.
The world had just changed. Travel. I mean, the mixing of cultures like that took place during that time period. You had the First World War, the Second World War, the Korean War. Vietnam was going on, right? You basically no longer had any confessional states, meaning, you know, Catholic countries that were explicitly Catholic. So Christendom is pretty much over. You've got these huge cultural movements going on. And so
this is so helpful.
Yeah.
Because it's so easy to look back with historical ignorance and wonder why it was even called in the first place. And to, as you say, these people are overly critical sometimes of the Second Vatican Council. And this is really helpful to realize why the church decided that something had to be done, said, some kind of renewal had to take place. Right. Can you keep talking about this sort of stuff? Because this is really fascinating.
Yeah, you know, I know I'm not a historian, but I would be hard pressed to think of another time frame of 90 years or so.
Yeah, with seismic
where that much change happened to humanity at the same time.
Yeah,
And especially when you think about Europe, which traditionally was Catholic, right? I mean, France was the eldest daughter of the church. It became very anti-clerical to the point where like you couldn't even teach, like people had to go study in other Catholic universities outside of France. There was that much animosity towards the church. After the 2 world wars, I mean, there was a lot of dismay and despair. You know, that's why you think of like German philosophers and how dark they are, right? There was a lot of concerns there. The scientific advancements happening, you know, those sorts of revolutions. So politically, culturally, technologically, you know, the way people thought, let's face it, I mean, even philosophy was sort of really struggling, right? I mean, you had these new thinkers coming up and people weren't even really trained in, you know, classical philosophy anymore, or to the extent that they used to be. So it's like, okay, there's a lot of stuff going on. We probably should address it. Let's try to explain some basic Catholic beliefs in a way that people can understand it. And so the Second Vatican Council, largely, he wanted it to be renewal within the church. So he wanted the church to be revived from within. He wanted to try to help reunite Christians together. And he wanted it to be missionary. Okay. So he's like, how can we spread the message of the gospel to the world?
And when you say renewal, what does that mean?
It's always one of those questions, I think. But I think sometimes we have this picture that the Catholic Church was great in the 1950s and early 60s, and then Vatican II ruined everything.
Yeah.
But that's not the case.
Okay.
And if you talk to people from that time period, they'll tell you that. But think about, just as one example, you know, then Ratzinger, long before he became Pope Benedict XVI, right? He wrote an article in the late 1950s, and it depends how you translate it, but it's either like the new pagans or the new heathens in the church. And he basically said, we have a facade. Like people are culturally Catholic. We've got the buildings. They're having the baptism and the first communion parties, but they're pagans. These people coming to church don't really believe.
When did he write that?
It was like I'm not positive. It was like 1958, 59, something like that. 57. I don't know. It was,
but before the renewals in the liturgy.
Oh, yeah. It was well before Vatican II. I mean, it was at least 4 or 5 years before Vatican II, I think. And he's basically saying, look, this is a facade, and it's going to come crashing down.
There's that German pessimism again.
You know, and because he basically was saying, look, like we're passing out the sacraments of initiation like candy. And I'm highly paraphrasing here, but that's basically what he's saying is we're baptizing babies to parents that haven't darkened the door of a church in years. Like, or, you know, people are going to mass, but they're not living the faith. They don't really believe. It's like you do these things because it's the cultural thing to do.
Okay.
You know, and
so you could say that the renewal, I guess renewal always means this in a way, but it's so that Catholics can know what they believe, why they believe it, and be inflamed with love for Christ and the mission of the church, right? I suppose.
Right. And for other people to know, you know, take advantage of the development of mass media. Like, let's get people to know, you know, what we actually hold.
Hey, thank you so much for watching. Before you go, do us a favor, leave a comment, let us know what you thought of the video, like, and subscribe.